Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast, looking back on all the big talking points from last week. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam. Still absolutely, peace out, Coop, and the main man himself, lead editor Ian Parks. Sam's gone for the... It's gone for it. Sam's already trying to start something. So you know what? I'll come to you first, Sam. How are you? Clearly in quite a good mood, as those who are watching this on YouTube will be able to see.
I'm very well, thank you, Nick. Reason for the peace outside is I don't know if you've seen our video where we did the whisper challenge, but as I'm introduced, I do the peace sign. And actually, the guys who edit our podcast have requested that I do that at the start of every podcast. So I'm just fulfilling their wishes.
A shout out to Yos and Yoris. Ian's not impressed.
The fact he's going to do a peace out sign when he comes on video every time.
Hey, look, yeah,
man.
An F1 team principal was married to a Spice Girl, so peace out.
What's that got to do with peace out?
The Spice Girls always used to be like, they always used to do it. Show my age.
Can we move swiftly on, please?
Yeah, moving swiftly on. Ian, how are you?
Oh, I'm fine, mate, after that nonsense. Good Lord. Oh, jeez. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode.
It's all good, everyone. The racing is nearly back. We're only, I think, 5-6 weeks away, so soon we'll stop
waffling.
That
we're all going stir crazy, do you reckon? Being
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so, and it's a good thing. Yeah, and it's a good thing that we actually have got a lot to talk about, and that the news is really starting to pick up again. Because otherwise, I mean, my hairline's receding. I'll have none left by the time the season starts. So I'm going to start off with a question because it's become a nice little theme. And this question, to get everything on track and focused, is in recognition of Kimi Antonelli. Well done, Kimi. You passed your driving test. Good job. It's a nice way to start your F1 career. He is, of course, the youngest driver on the F1 grid by some margin. He was born in 2006. Which makes me feel really, really old. Of course, Fernando Alonso is the oldest driver on the F1 grid. I'm not sure if you can see where this question for today's episode is going. The question is, how many days older is Fernando Alonso than Kimi Antonelli? The key there being days. I don't want years, I want days. And of course, for those who are watching and listening along, please also join in. And they're both already...
Go on. Do some math.
You can have a quick piece of paper.
Can I Google?
You can get a piece of paper.
Can I Google when their birthdays were? I know Kimi Antonelli's was in late August. I know Fernando Alonso was. Well, he is 43. Oh no, I do know when his birthday is. Okay.
They're both going silent. I will give some live commentary for those who are listening to this podcast. Sam has got his hands on his forehead, which he is now rubbing kind of in disbelief because he's looking like he's trying to do some hardcore maths when actually it's his attempt at trying to look like he knows something when quite clearly he has absolutely no idea. On the other hand, Ian...
Can you stop talking? I'm trying to work this out.
It's a podcast. If I go silent, people are going to think they've hit pause by accident or something. Right, maybe if they're driving, they've lost Wi-Fi or signal. You've got Sam, Sam's hands are now on his eyes. He's moved his hands from his forehead to his eyes. He's now put them on the table. He's looking around for a pen. He's not got any paper. He's just going to write on his desk. Ian's gone silent. He's doing some serious maths. I can see him counting. Ian thinks he's got it. Sam is
I don't think I've got it exactly, but I think I've got a reasonably good shot at giving you a good number. That's for sure.
Okay, so Ian's got an answer. Sam has only just now decided to get a pen and paper. As always, he's letting the team down. Sam, I'll give you 10 seconds because we have got a lot to discuss, and this is only meant to be the fun intro. At this rate, this will be the entire podcast, so thank you, Sam. Come on, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sam, you can wait. Ian, what is your answer? How many days older is Alonso than Antonelli?
I want to go 9,105.
9,105. Sam.
9,200.
All right, now I've got to do maths and figure out who's closer.
Wait, 9,000. And I can tell you
the answer. You're both wrong. You're both quite close. The answer is Alonso is 9,158 days older than Antonelli.
So just wins.
Sam just wins because Sam is 42 years away.
I'm 50.
Ian is 53.
53.
You know what?
You know what?
That's Sam's
That
first
wasn't
correct
bad, was
answer.
it?
That's
That's
not my
Sam's
first.
first correct answer of the
correct
year.
answer.
Well, first point of the year, I think it's fair to say.
All right,
But
all right.
that to make it a bit simpler, it's 25 years and 27 days between them. I mean, wow. Alonso must feel old.
Well, I mean, he
You
is.
count leap year
but-
days.
But I didn't bother to try and work that out. I was like, that's just,
Too specific, yeah.
yeah.
I will say I
I'm just
used
gonna
I used an app because there was no way. I thought I would try and do the maths myself, but then I thought, oh, leap years, and then I realised from last week's episode how bad my counting is. So I thought, you know what, I'll use an app. Right? Shall we? Sam gets the point. What's the
Well,
Sam?
just very quickly, are we going to do like a countdown style? How did you work it out? Because I did
Go on then. How do you work it out?
25 times 3, 75,
75.
times 100, 7,500. And then I just kind of guessed from there. And also knew that 10,000 days is about 27 years. Over 27 years.
I'm speechless. Shall we very quickly move on to the first talking point?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go for it. I think
Wait for next week for the next. Wait next week for the next question. Sam, I'm going to come to you for the first talking point because it surrounds Lewis Hamilton. Of course, last week was his second officially, well, not his second really with Ferrari. Of course, they were in Barcelona testing, and of course, it wasn't the most ideal test. Whilst Lewis posted at the end of the week that he's looking forward to the first race, he did, of course, have his first off. Crashed in Barcelona. He was uninjured. The car, of course, was unfortunately somewhat damaged, meaning that it impacted the rest of the running, obviously in particular for Leclerc. But it's interesting because this could be, perhaps we'll only find out at the end of 2026, history repeating itself. Because for those who are unaware of this fact, Lewis crashed in his first real test for McLaren in 2007. He then won the title in Valencia. He then won the title, his first title in 2008. In his first real Mercedes test in 2013, he of course crashed and then went on to win the 2014 title, which was his second driver's title. Sam, my question for you, is Lewis Hamilton going to repeat history and become the 2026 world champion?
Yes. It's a very good omen, isn't it?
Is it very interesting?
So not only has he already forecast the 2025 champion, he's now already gone and forecast the 2026 champion.
And they're
George
both
is
British.
25, Lewis 26. There you go,
British
folks.
bias.
F1 season's over. We don't need to discuss anymore.
That is pure coincidence that they are both British, Nick. Let's not play on that angle because there's no basis in my thinking there on that.
I take it back.
But no, in reality, you can't forecast that far ahead, particularly when you add a whole new rule slate into the mix. But it is a good omen. It is a nice pattern. We love drawing at these kind of little strings and saying, "Oh, look what happened before."
It's a fun story.
That inform, yeah,
Fun
exactly.
story, exactly.
So
yeah.
that's all it is. But interestingly, David Croft, I was speaking to him the other night, and he was saying,
Name dropping. Ooh.
"What? I'm not name dropping. I'm
8 minutes in,
I
and
need
he's
to
already
attribute
dropped
the
one
quote."
name.
Anyway, he thinks this season coming is Lewis's best shot, which doesn't fit the pattern, which irks me. I've got to admit, but he feels that given how major the regulation changes are heading into 2026, this season is the first and foremost opportunity for Lewis to win an 8th title. So whether or not that will come to fruition, who knows? But yeah, that would certainly buck the trend, which would disappoint me a little bit.
I think the point that's really interesting, and I'll come to you in it because it's something that we discussed a little bit in the recent F1 update that went out on YouTube, and that obviously, Lewis is so accustomed, of course, to driving a Mercedes F1 car and how it feels, how it works, the way the steering wheel feels in his hands and whatnot. Of course, the Ferrari is going to be very, very different, and of course, part of this crash is likely going to be a case of him still just getting used to everything. It is very early days, of course, getting used to just things feeling different, of course, working with different people, trying to find that limit. Because ultimately, despite the fact he's a 7-time world champion, statistically the most successful F1 driver of all time, he's only ever raced 4-2 teams. Ferrari are just the third.
Yeah, exactly. The key phrase there that you pointed out, Nick, is finding the limit. Okay, yes, it's a different F1 car compared to what he's going to be driving. over the course of the 25 upcoming campaign, of course. Yep. Barcelona, they've been using the SF23, which is the 2-year-old cars permitted under the regulations. Yeah, slightly different car, but nevertheless, there will be a very similar, there will still be similar aspects to that car that will be carried over into the 25. You know, it's a whole new different environment for Lewis within that cockpit. Different cockpit feel, different steering wheel in front of him, of course, different buttons to press. Well, it's not going to be the exact same layout as he's been so used to over the past few years, and that he will have played a major part in designing as to where he wants certain aspects, certain buttons to press on his steering wheel. It's going to be something completely new inside Ferrari that he's now got to get used to. Of course, we understood when he was at Fiorano, he was having a little bit of trouble. I'll just quickly go back. Fiorano was the first unofficial test for Lewis, that little outing that he had 30 laps around the track, 2,000 fans there turned up to watch him take part. This one at Barcelona was behind closed doors, very private test. Barely a scrap of information emerged out of it, other than the fact that Lewis had this off primarily. So yeah, pedal feel as well is going to be a bit different for him with regard to what he's experiencing, and that feel that he's getting through the pedals when he's accelerating, braking, etc. So, as I say, all these different aspects of this car he has to get used to, because these are going to be very similar aspects that are going to carry over into the 2025 car. So it's all about finding that limit. And now he's done that. And as I did mention in update, don't get me wrong, he's not deliberately gone out to crash to try and find the limit. He's always going to want to try and get as close as he possibly can. But on this occasion, he's obviously gone over that line, but at least now he has a better understanding of the car that he will be experiencing come that pre-season test over the 3 days at the end of February in Bahrain.
Like the fact you mentioned, obviously, that it's, Lewis getting used to new things. It's obviously going to take us, the rest of the media, the rest of the paddock, a bit of time to get used to seeing Lewis in red in general. One person in particular who's going to probably need a bit of time to process everything is, and Sam, obviously I'm going to let you name drop it, because obviously you got to also speak to Toto Wolff last week, and he came out to you with some really interesting comments, obviously, about seeing Lewis in red in a Ferrari. And he said that it's a little bit like you divorce amicably and it's all good, and then you see your partner for the first time with a new friend. I mean, it probably does feel a little bit like that for Toto, and that, he knows Lewis so well. Lewis raced for Mercedes for so many years, has been associated with the German manufacturer since his teenagehood, effectively. And all of a sudden now he's gone off to one of your biggest rivals.
Yeah, he actually was speaking specifically at that point to Sky when he was saying those remarks. But yeah, it just underlines how difficult and strange it will be for not only all of us, but Toto Wolff to kind of get used to that, having worked so close with Lewis over 12 seasons. And to be fair, though, he really underpinned the strength of their relationship. He also was saying how he had messaged Lewis to say how iconic those photos were, those first images of Lewis in the red, and how that he didn't expect anything less from Lewis in that sense. So yeah, I think for me personally, looking at that, it just kind of fit together. When you saw those photos, it didn't seem like, oh, this feels out of place, this feels weird. It wasn't a kind of, a lot of athletes at the end of their career, they go to a team, like Nick, you as a Chelsea fan, seeing Frank Lampard score against you for Man City must have been truly, truly bizarre.
Still hurts.
Well, exactly. But it's not, for me, it doesn't feel like that. It doesn't feel this kind of, it's not this weird, oh, that doesn't look right. It just seems to fit. And that's what a lot of the Ferrari fans were saying at Fiorano, that it just works.
And that's really interesting. Go on, Ian.
I think not only the image of Lewis in the Ferrari suit for the first time, the racing suit for the first time, but I think also that what will always now go down as an iconic image of Lewis dressed very dapper in his black suit, black tie, white shirt, this black overcoat draped over his shoulders, stood in front of Enzo Ferrari's house. And of course, what he has labelled as his favourite supercar as well, the F40, which is a classic, of course. But I think that picture has gone absolutely viral, and it has become the most viewed image on Instagram in F1 history. So, as an iconic image, that is always going to be one that people remember, I think, and I know I will certainly will going forward, more than the picture of Lewis in a red suit. But I get what Toto was saying, because that divorce did happen, and all of a sudden, hold on a second, this guy I've known for so long, we've had such a great relationship with, now he really is with this other team. So yeah, I can imagine that his thoughts on that were quite mixed.
I would like to also point out to the eagle-eyed, or rather eagle-eared viewers, that Ian just dropped the first absolutely of the podcast.
Did I really?
Yeah.
There you go.
I didn't even notice because
can
my
never
mind
live up to
is just
your
used to
high
you.
standards, sir.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the problem. And you know what? Ian can say it as many times as he wants. I don't care. He's allowed to. You're the one who has done it too many times, and you got the ban. So unfortunately,
You're the one with the nickname, not me, mate.
Yeah. So I know that's your way of trying to get it in, but you know what? It doesn't work.
Doesn't matter. No, it really does. Absolutely, it does. And I did say that one deliberately.
Absolutely. Right. Very quickly, though, on Toto. So I did it there. You didn't even notice. Obviously, it's all been very, he used the word amicable. It's all been very amicable, very friendly. It's so good to see Lewis in red and this and that. But Ian, there's got to be part of Toto that's thinking, Lewis has left his team after so many years ahead of what is a massive regulation change in 2026. We know Mercedes are in this difficult position in these current regulations. It's not been easy for them, in particular with what happened at the end of 2021 as well. Surely there's got to be a part of Toto that's thinking, you know what? I would love to prove Lewis wrong and make him almost regret leaving Mercedes. Do you think there is that side of him maybe? Do you think there is a sense in Mercedes that, we want to show Lewis that, you know what, you should have stuck with us?
Of course there will be. That's sport at the end of the day. When anybody moves on from in any sport, and then they revisit. Let's talk about a football player for argument's sake, and he's had a great period of time, and then he leaves and goes to another team, and then obviously he comes back with that team. All the fans, whilst they might applaud and be grateful for that period of history that they enjoyed with that particular football player at that particular team, naturally they are going to want their team to put one over on that new player's team. And it's going to be the same for Toto. It's going to be the same for everybody inside Mercedes, you would assume. That yes, well done, Lewis. Thanks for all the great years that you had with us. All those titles, 6 world titles, 8 constructors championships. Quite one of the greatest periods, if not the greatest period in F1 history in terms of a driver and team combination. And of course, he's gone now, and he did it in quite extraordinary circumstances. We're 1 year on, 12 months ago, February 1st last year. And no one saw it coming, apart from those of people, of course, that were really in the know at that particular time. Normally, those kind of things, you get a little inkling that it drip feeds out through the media, and all of a sudden this little snowball effect occurs. There was nothing. It was like that dropped February 1 last year, and it's like, what? You had to reread it to ensure that it was actually true. So moving on 1 year on from that, now Lewis is gone. Toto will have now got over the sight of seeing Lewis in that red Ferrari suit, in a Ferrari for the first time, and it'd be like, right, game on now, Lewis. We're going to show you that you should not have left us and that you should have stayed here, that we've got the right plan going forward. Maybe not this year, maybe not 2025. It might still be another tricky year for Mercedes, given we're in this ground effect era. But 2026, who's to say Mercedes won't get it all right again with that new power unit, be the dominant team again as they were from 2014 onwards?
I, for one, am fascinated to see Lewis's and George Russell's first battle in 2025. I just think that's going to be something. Let's see what they really think about one another. That would be really interesting to see. On the topic of moving on, and of course, the big news last week surrounded former F1 driver Johnny Herbert, who's obviously been released by the FIA as an F1 race steward, was due to be a race steward, of course, in this season opening race in Australia. And obviously, it's a really topical conversation because obviously Johnny as we know, and of course, as I imagine fans read often, obviously there's quite a lot of media stuff with some gambling sites, something which is becoming increasingly present in F1. You're seeing more and more former F1 drivers, F1 figures doing these interviews with these gambling websites. And of course, he's no longer an FIA race steward. And what was really interesting is kind of, it feels like, Sam and Ian, feel free to chip in afterwards as well. It feels like almost a bit of a precedent is starting to be set now by the FIA in that, almost a message in that stewards must only be stewards, and that in terms of the F1 sport, you do not do any media punditry, any media interviews or anything. You stick solely to the responsibility of being a Formula One FIA race steward.
It feels like somewhat of a road to Damascus moment for the FIA, and it's kind of this break from, we cannot allow this to happen anymore. And I think that is a fair enough point. It's a fair enough decision. And I think most people are looking at it and going, yeah, of course. Like every other sport, you wouldn't have that. As Christian Horner has pointed out, you wouldn't have that in Premier League football. It's totally inappropriate, he said. And for the FIA to make that step, I think they've made the correct call. It's very harsh on Johnny Herbert because I think he is now being, this whole issue is being pinned squarely on him. He's not the only one who is, there are conflicts of interest in the work he does. And it is ultimately a situation that is of the FIA's making, in the sense that it is a volunteer role. People have to seek work from other sources, because all you do is get expenses paid. So it is therefore part of a kind of a wider debate on, do we and when will we see full-time stewards in F1? Zach Brown has called for it. Corinne Chandok has called for it just last week. And I think it's really important that the FIA kind of heeds that and looks at it closely, because like other sports around the world, you need full-time professional stewarding. I don't think that's an unrealistic expectation or ask.
Ian, got anything to add on the feeling this precedent's kind of been set, it feels?
Yeah, I do agree with that. But the point I wanted to draw on more in particular is regard to full-time stewards. I do think it is about time that we went down that road to ensure greater consistency across verdicts. Yeah, these, as Sam pointed out, these guys come in, it's a volunteer basis. They do their best. We have Derek Warwick, Johnny Herbert, gone, of course, but other drivers, they come and go. They sit in for a race and then they're out for two, and then they might come back, and certain things might have happened. And it's a really difficult one when you're flitting in and out. I think if you're there full time, permanently, there will be that greater degree of consistency. Therefore, the drivers know what to expect. The team principals and everybody within the teams will know what to expect, because you're dealing with a panel that's going to be the same panel, race in, race out. The only difficulty is finding that permanent 4-person panel to go about this role. And 24 Grand Prix a year, it's not an easy one for anyone. We know what it's like with the teams having to rotate staff because of the 24 race schedule. So now you're asking 4 people to be there, ever present at all 24 Grand Prix. Even the FIA communications staff, they're not there all 24 Grand Prix, and just dropping them in as an example. Even they miss a Grand Prix or two. So it's going to be really difficult, I think, to find 4 people willing to do that, to give up a massive part of their lives to do that on a permanent basis. You would assume that they would have to be well remunerated for that kind of role. And it's a question of, has the FIA got that within its coffers to produce that level of stewardship? But at least we know the one thing it would do would be produce, as I say, that great level of consistency.
I think you almost need to get to a point where it's like, football refereeing, where you start learning to that is a vocation that you are working towards from a young age, and you can help out in other forms of lower grassroots motorsport, and you can work up. But that is always kind of I want to be steward. I want to work for the FIA and F1, other forms of motorsport under that umbrella. And that, I think, process, that kind of road to F1 that you see for drivers, I think if you can replicate that with officials, I think that probably is the way to go, where people see it as a career, not necessarily something that ex-drivers do on the side. Because, yeah, Ian, you're absolutely right that that's where it then becomes difficult to get people to commit full time.
But this is where also it does fall back on, if you have an introduced full-time stewards, and that consistency that the teams and drivers are calling for, fans as well, it would likely come, whether that be being consistently strict, consistently lenient. Obviously, only to have full-time stewards will be able to find that out. But again, it comes back to the point, could we perhaps have, in the way that the FIA do it, teams do it where they do rotate staff? Could you have, for example, 2 teams of 4 and they do for maybe 12 races each? Could that be perhaps something? Because what's really interesting is, you mentioned obviously about who would pay this. Would it be the FIA? Zach Brown, obviously the McLaren CEO, one of the people, as Sam mentioned, has called for permanent stewards, has said that actually he'd be more than happy for full-time stewards, and actually that be happy for the teams to pay. He'd be happy for McLaren to pay their share. Is that something that maybe the teams in the future could agree on, that if they want this consistency, if they want to see the same people doing the race steward roles, could we get to a point where maybe it's the teams who are paying for the stewards, not the FIA? Do you think?
Okay, let's pull a figure out the air, and let's say for that kind of role,
how much do you want?
You would pay someone £100,000 a year, base figure. That's £400,000 for 4 people, and so that's split across the 10 teams, £40,000. When you put it like that, not a tremendous amount of money to a Formula One team, is it? If that's a road we could potentially go down, and then of course the FIA, as it has done, pays all the travel expenses and everything else that goes around, accommodation and flights and all that kind of thing, and food. But £40,000 per team, and I'm just saying as £100,000 because I think that would be the right kind of figure. Maybe people might disagree, but maybe it should be more. Maybe people might see it as less. But I think just taking a base figure, I think that would be the right kind of figure for a steward to be compensated for that kind of role. So it's a great conundrum that the teams have got, that the FIA has got, and if that can get all the other team principals on board, then it's most definitely, you've got to think a way of going forward. But you've still got to find the 4 people that are willing to give up that 24 weeks of their year.
What's interesting as well, though, and on the topic of new roles, I think actually that one, though, the full-time race stewards, I think is something that will be really interesting to keep an eye on over the next few months, because you imagine that's a conversation that's going to come up in the early rounds of the season. Of course, that fee, if, for example, £40,000 each team, would even drop even more in 2026 with obviously Cadillac arriving, so even less for the teams to pay. But on the topic of new roles, Yuki Tsunoda has one obviously at Red Bull. He is Red Bull's new reserve driver, on top of course, being a Racing Bull's full-time driver for 2025. And Sam, it's an interesting one because obviously Yuki again didn't get the nod to race alongside Max at Red Bull. Was given to Liam Lawson, but there's always been this feeling that kind of, unfortunately, Yuki will probably never get to drive for Red Bull. But this new role kind of keeps him weirdly within that circle.
It does for the year. I don't think it necessarily tells us that. It doesn't move the needle for Yuki. Honestly, before it was announced, I think we all kind of assumed that if needed, it would be Yuki to step up into that seat for a weekend. It was more a case of, well, what do they do with Yuki's seat if they needed to put him in the Red Bull, which, as we know, will be Ayumu Iwasa over the course of the year. So I don't think it hugely moves the needle. But what was interesting is last week Christian Horner was saying, when asked, would Yuki be put in the car if Liam struggles over the course of the year? He, no surprise, didn't answer the question, but he kind of gave Yuki is one of the many drivers in our pool, including Isaac Hadjar. And it was that kind of, just obviously doesn't want to get anywhere near that kind of, that question, say anything like that on the record. So it just underlines to me that they just don't have that, ultimately, that in the pipeline for Yuki. Yuki will probably have to make a Pierre Gasly-esque move to another midfield outfit, maybe even somewhere like Cadillac next season with 2 seats opening up in order to progress his F1 career. So, yeah, I think it doesn't necessarily move the needle, but it is certainly a change that he has been formally announced as that driver, because he hasn't been that reserve driver for Red Bull in the past.
But what strikes me is that obviously for Red Bull, let's say, for example, either Liam or Max were unable to race and Yuki comes in. That's a very experienced driver to take that spot, because also you've got to remember, and Ian, again, I'll come to you because we briefly mentioned this in the recent F1 update, and that obviously there is this, I suppose, from now on, this new rule in that if drivers do consistently swear or criticize the FIA, whilst at first it will be fines, eventually it will end in a suspension, and ultimately a race ban. Do you think we could see a route where teams announce perhaps more experienced reserve drivers, given that, we've seen a lot of raw emotion last year from drivers like Max, like Yuki? It's not uncommon to hear drivers swear over the radio, and quite clearly that's going to be frowned upon more often now. Do you think we might now start seeing these, maybe not these young drivers being announced as reserves with little experience, and perhaps more experienced drivers in case the worst case scenario happens and their driver receives a ban?
What I would suggest there, Nick, is that you've got to have the younger drivers. There's always got to be a route for the younger drivers to be given their opportunity. I appreciate what you're saying, but bottom line is the reserve role is there for the up-and-comers. And I know Mercedes has gone a different route this year with bringing Valtteri on board. But you can see with Mercedes, they're utilising Valtteri in a slightly different way. And Toto has actually pointed out, and I read some comments, I think he gave to you, Sam, last week, whereby they see him as quite a mentor for Kimi Antonelli. They're not going to, they want Valtteri for Kimi to really learn off Valtteri. And because Valtteri knows Mercedes anyway, to a certain extent. Yes, he's been away for a few years, but not too much would have changed. But for me, that reserve role, it's always got to be for a young, up-and-coming driver, knowing that it's that next stepping stone, getting that seat and that opportunity in Formula One. So kind of disagree with your thinking along those lines, but I do get what you're saying, certainly.
Fair enough. We haven't got to agree on this podcast. Of course, it makes conversation. It's lovely. Let's move on though to the final broad talking point, and it's kind of sticking with Red Bull. But obviously, last week Ford had a season's launch event, and obviously they announced that from 2027 they'll be having a hypercar World Endurance Championship program. Amazing stuff. I'm very much looking forward to seeing the battle of Ford against Ferrari in the top class of WEC. It's going to be very, very exciting. But what was really striking to me was the presence of Christian Horner. Of course, we know that in 2026, Red Bull are going to be receiving assistance, technical support from Ford Engineering. But I thought it was really interesting, Sam, to see Christian there, obviously talking about 2026, because quite clearly, this relationship between Ford and Red Bull, despite the fact that Red Bull still have this year with Honda, it's quite clear that relationship is already very much taking shape, and that they are quite clearly working close together.
They are, and they're working closer together than was initially laid out when that partnership was formed. So initially, it was that Ford would be supplying some electrical components for the Red Bull powertrain's power unit from 2026. Now they're going to be helping with at least the turbo and some other expertise as well. So I would wager that over the next year, we are going to see those ties come even closer. And then once we actually kick into that new regulations era, then it will be really, really a true partnership between the two. Ford evidently very, very much invested in their motorsport arm of the business and expanding that, as we've seen from the news that they will be racing in WEC from 2027, which is, as you say, great news for motorsport fans, reviving the great Ford versus Ferrari rivalry in that series. So this is a step towards a more motorsport-centric future for Ford, and I think that will have positive implications for both F1 and Red Bull.
And Ian, I'll come to you just on this final point of this episode, but obviously with Ford looking like, as Sam just mentioned, having perhaps a bigger presence in its F1 return with Red Bull than initially expected, it kind of shows that there is almost this titanic kind of American battle that's going to take shape. Because, of course, you have Haas, of course, they're going to have support of Toyota, but you've obviously got the arrival of Cadillac and GM, and then Ford having a bigger presence as well. Yeah, this is going to be something else to look out for, because you would imagine that all of Haas, Cadillac, and Ford, they're not going to want to be last. They're not going to want to be seen as the weaklings of America, are they?
Someone's going to have to be. I mean, yes, it's not just Ford v Ferrari. Yeah, as you rightly pointed out, there's going to be a Ford v GM element to this, of course. And GM, as we know, is coming into it as a complete entity. With regard to the Ford, it's a partnership with Red Bull. So a little bit different in that case. Yes, of course, we do know that for the first 2 years, when Cadillac finally gets its official confirmation, of course, we are still waiting for that. But nevertheless, they're building up behind the scenes, bringing people on board. They're putting the car together as much as they possibly can at this particular time. And yes, they're going to be using a Ferrari power unit, but from 28 onwards, they will, of course, have their own power unit. So there will be then this US package, complete US package, which Haas has never been, as we know, given its strong affiliation with Ferrari, not just a power unit, but as many components as it can lay its hands on under the current regulations. And as I say, Red Bull, the primary component of the Red Bull Ford partnership. Ford, of course, providing a lot of electrical components, but nevertheless, we've still got that degree of rivalry that's certainly going to be biting away at those two teams. And you're absolutely right; they are going to want to finish ahead of one another. That's for certain. They're not going to want to be last on that grid. Red Bull won't be, of course, nowhere near. But for GM, I think that first year, next year, there's going to be a lot of pride at stake in terms of, they're going to be throwing everything they can at it, of course, in terms of resources. But it's going to be a very difficult period of time because they are just coming into it completely brand new as a team, not just supplying or having a power unit supply for those first 2 years, but as a team in its own right, trying to get their heads around the current regulations. Whereas so many teams, the other rivals, whilst they will, of course, have only received those regulations themselves in its entirety from January the 1st, the know-how, the understanding, the appreciation of how F1 has worked in previous years will at least stand them in certain stead. Little point I just want to make as well, and a shout out to our technical writer, Paolo Filicetti. He did a piece the other day outlining that where Ferrari and McLaren might have a particular edge over their rivals going into the 2026 campaign. Paolo was referring to the fact that Ferrari's changing its front suspension for this year. That is a component that's going to carry over into next year's car. McLaren, according to Paolo, is going to be coming out with quite a radical concept for this year in terms of its overall package. And he's of the belief that a lot of that will be able to carry over into next year's car. It wouldn't be going so radical if it did not feel that it could take that package, certain aspects of it at least, and put it in next year's car. So you can see where I'm coming from by saying that, current F1 teams got so much going on that they can take potentially from this year into 26, whereas a team like GM/Cadillac coming at it from a completely fresh sheet of paper, whereby they've got no history of a Formula One car over these past few years. So it's going to be very, very difficult for them, as we all know.
Well, they've got about a year to get themselves in tip-top shape. Sam, Ian, amazing stuff as always. If you've been watching this podcast on YouTube, please be sure to let us know in the comment section below your thoughts on anything we have discussed in this week's episode. On top of that, if you can smash that like button and subscribe to the Racing News 365 YouTube channel, that would be amazing. And of course, if you're listening to this, but also want to share your thoughts, feel free to jump across to YouTube. If you're driving, maybe wait until you're not driving and let us know your thoughts as well. It'd be great to hear from some of you, from myself, Sam and Ian. This has been the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast. See you later.
Take care as always, folks, and I'll leave Sam to do peace out.
I was just going to do thanks for joining us, but yeah, peace out. Let's go with it. Let's roll.